Curriculum presentation, the framework of curriculum development. Hello, my name is Chef Todd Jackson. I'm a culinary instructor and an adult learner, and learning more about curriculum design development. I'm focusing on the Gourmet course that I teach, mainly the cheese lesson. We started off doing a process analysis, and in our textbook, it says ever since the term curriculum was added to instructors' vocabulary, it has seemed to convey many things to many people. It covers things like subjects, materials to be taught to students in an educational institution. It could include skills, abilities, experiences. Yes, there are different types of curricula, like written, hidden, phantom, or null, just to name a few. The key points and takeaways that I learned from this were curriculum development, curriculum design, different types of models that you can use. I researched more of the CPA model by Daniel Vogler, and the three things that it really kind of focused on were planning, delivery, and evaluation. So I identified my first problem, and I say lecture time. To me, the problem is we do not have enough lecture time. Our lectures only last about 50 minutes face to face. So the solution was to come up with ways to cover the content more, not just in the 50-minute lecture, but also utilizing what we could in the LMS. Why? We want the students to better understand. We want to deliver stronger instruction and engage the students more. How? Adding materials, looking at assignments students can do without completely covering each one of those items in the 50 minutes. New elements also could be incorporated into the lesson. Another part we looked at was the content standard analysis, and according to ohio.gov, it describes the knowledge and skills that students should attain, often called the what, of what students should know and be able to do. So the key points and takeaways that I have on this were the American Culinary Federation sends us the standards. The Alabama Community College System also sends us standards and guidelines. We now have our program standards based on the two of those combined. From that, we also have set up program and course outcomes, which we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then we need to also look at how we're going to meet the standards. What are the benefits of the standards? Accountability and credibility to the course and the student and the instructor. We need to also look at updating these from time to time with different types of practices, uh, addressing where we might have deficiencies. One of the other components that we looked at was the task analysis, and this kind of was one of my favorite things to kind of look at. But according to our textbooks, the process wherein tasks performed by workers employed in a particular job were identified and verified. So some of the key points and takeaways that I had were identifying the task. So kind of what the students would be doing, breaking down certain tasks into smaller tasks, smaller chunks, so it's easier to understand and obtain. Setting limitations on some of the different tasks because they could be too much involved, not only for the student, but for the instructor, and possibly even some of the equipment necessary that they might need. We also focused a lot on using tasks as skill builders. One of the things that I discuss and talk about with all my classes is look at all the skills that you build in every one of your classes, from basic food prep all the way up to more of the advanced. So I took this a little bit deeper and applied it more to the cheese lesson, um, developing and trying to make sure they understand different things like use of equipment, different ingredients that are utilized in making cheese, focusing on the basic parts of cooking skills that they should have picked up in previous classes, kind of bringing that forward, building on their original skills, understanding basic measurements. That one seems to be a little bit more obvious, along with following just a simple recipe. Taking it to the lab part, we have to look at temperature control when it does come to certain types of recipes that we do. We don't want to burn things, obviously. So developing the task part kind of made me think a little bit more on other classes too and what this could lead into. I liked that particular section. The next part was goals, outcomes, and objectives. And again, according to our textbook, the establishment of sound goals and objectives represents one of the most crucial steps in curriculum development. Again, key points and takeaways, alignment between the goals, objectives, and outcomes of each class, breaking that down even into each learning module or lesson module from that perspective. So you can see the very first one is going to be the actual course objective. It's very broad because it covers more than just one lesson. And for this example, we break it down into the module objectives, or you could call these the lesson objectives. So that kind of breaks it down into smaller chunks. This is kind of one of the things that I was thinking and looking at is how can we cover some of these material without taking up and consuming the full 50 minutes of the actual face-to-face lecture. So these would be some good examples where we could do that. We could have them do a little bit of a short paper or something of that nature to cover that. And we want to make sure that all of the assignments and assessments that we do are measurable and align with the objectives and outcomes. Content and unit development. The ability to select, sequence, and implement instructional tasks to meet a specific instructional outcome. To me, this was pretty straightforward and simple. We've got our goal, we got our outcome. Now there's our task list that we've created, and we need to kind of look and see how we're going to do that. Are there essential questions that we need to make sure that we're discussing and asking? Covering things from the reading material. What are the students learning? What can we record, in a lecture format and post to our LMS? Strong, good assignments and assessments to help tie back into our learning outcomes. Looking at different supplemental materials. Just one quick example there is YouTube is just packed full of good videos. I found some that were the history of how cheese was first made. So those things we could post in there to cover some of that, I guess, kind of lack of class time, if you will. And then going back and applying some of these thought processes to other lecture topics, not just cheese. I kind of like this little quote from the movie Field of Dreams with Kevin Costner. If you build it, they will come. Well, hopefully if we can build it correctly and adjust when necessary, they will come. Instructional strategies. How we educators plan to connect the content using different learning techniques to all of our students. Again, key points and takeaways. We're going to look at different ways of pulling out things from the domains, from their learning abilities. My favorite thing to kind of look at when it does come to objectives is utilizing Bloom's taxonomy. Addressing things at times where you have students that have certain abilities. Some students might have different disabilities. We all know that every student learns differently in different ways. My goal, my mission in a sense, is teach to the student, relate the content to the real world. Some students, as you know, will be better in the books. Some students will do better in the labs. Some students will just flat out bomb a test. So not putting too much pressure on one particular area, kind of balancing out a little bit, and then playing to the student, teaching to the student, not teaching to the class. Final thoughts. How could this curriculum be used by myself or others? In the case somebody did have to take over a class, it's already built. Maybe we just need someone to substitute for one particular class. Everything's there. If you're teaching more than one section of a certain type of a class, it would be easy to incorporate that into the LMS. We can also use this as a template and examples for other types of courses that we might be teaching. Of course, the content's going to change. And then what have I learned from this? Planning, writing it down, remaining flexible. And I think the last key point would be just aligning the assessments up with the outcomes and the goals of the particular class, or in this particular case, the module that we're working on. What would I do differently? Maybe doing a more detailed task analysis. Beyond that, I'm really not sure what I would do differently. Uh, but I think looking at the class itself and each one of our little steps has really opened up my eyes to kind of go back and look at what I'm doing moving forward. And in conclusion, it's like building a puzzle. What are we trying to build? What type of puzzle are we doing? Are we doing something that's going to be simple, or is it going to be a 4,000 piece jigsaw puzzle? How do we do it? Well, we follow guidelines, we follow objectives and goals. And then why do we do it? Because we want to deliver stronger content to our students, covering the material better engaging them so they can learn what we're trying to teach them. Experimentation also, sometimes we have to think outside the box. With that being said, that's going to wrap up this presentation. And of course, here are some of the sources that I've used. Thank you for watching, and hope maybe you've learned something from me.